Hello. My name is Sky Murrin. They called me the failure in front of 100 people, at my sister's birthday party, no less. She smiled as she said it, like it was a joke everyone had agreed on but me. They laughed. All of them. But what none of them knew was that I had been preparing for that moment for years, quietly, patiently, while they cut me out of family photos, credit lines, dinner tables, and trust funds. I never shouted. I never begged. I just built. And when the screen lit up, charity foundation founded by Sky Murrin, the laughter stopped. Now tell me what happens when the invisible sister stops asking to be seen. The first thing I noticed when I stepped into the lobby of the Grandview Hotel wasn't the chandeliers or the velvet drapes but the smell of expensive perfume hanging in the air. It was the kind of scent you only encounter at fundraisers or political dinners, sweet but sharp, like it wants to remind you that you don't belong. I tugged at the sleeve of my navy dress, the one I'd saved for months to buy, and tried to ignore the fact that my invitation to this event had arrived as a Facebook tag 2 nights ago. Not a phone call, not a mailed card. Just a tag under a photo that read, "Don't forget to RSVP for Callista's 41st birthday gala." I stood for a moment by the check-in table, trying to collect myself. Everyone else swept in with gift bags and champagne smiles. I carried nothing but a small clutch and a gnawing sense of being an afterthought. "Good evening," said a woman in black with a clipboard and an earpiece. She glanced at my name tag and tilted her head. "You're Sky Murrin. Right this way." She didn't guide me toward the grand ballroom entrance lined with floral arches. Instead, she took me past the rows of linen-covered tables where familiar faces sat laughing, toward a corner near a swinging kitchen door. "Here we are," she said, pulling out a chair at a small, round table squeezed between the restroom corridor and the service station. Her tone was polite, but her eyes flicked to the clipboard again, as if checking she'd delivered the family embarrassment to the right place. I looked around. My tablemates were 2 people I didn't recognize, a couple scrolling on their phones, and an older man already sipping coffee. The roar of the kitchen and the faint scent of disinfectant from the restroom seeped into our corner. From here, I could see the edge of the main room where my sister stood, glittering like a chandelier herself, wrapped in a red gown that caught the light. Everyone circled her like bees around a hive. She didn't even glance my way. I sat down slowly, aware of the scratchy fabric under my fingers. "Excuse me," I asked the man beside me. "Is this the singles table?" He shrugged without looking up. "No idea. They just told us to sit here." His wife whispered something about overflow seating, and they both chuckled. I turned my gaze toward the main hall, toward my mother. Verena was radiant as always, in a pale gold dress, laughing with one of Callista's sponsors. She'd once told me that being supportive sometimes meant being quiet. I had learned the second half of that lesson well. From where I sat, I could see the stage, the huge screen behind it flashing photos of Callista on magazine covers, Callista at charity runs, Callista smiling with celebrities. My own work, the community grants I'd written, the food drives I'd organized, existed off-screen, invisible. I reminded myself to breathe through my nose and not shift too much in my chair. Every movement here felt magnified. A waiter passed by with a tray of canapés. "Would you like one?" he asked, his tone kind. I shook my head. My stomach was a knot. Then the lights dimmed. The crowd fell into a hush. Callista took the stage, her red dress shimmering. She thanked her guests one by one, her stylist, her personal trainer, her assistant, even the hotel manager. Applause followed each name. Then she paused, scanning the room, eyes twinkling like she'd just remembered a punchline. "And my sweet baby sister Sky is here too," she announced, voice syrupy. "Still figuring out life, but always brings good vibes." Laughter rippled across the hall. Not cruel exactly, just the laughter people give when they think it's harmless. My mother looked at her drink. No one glanced my way. I smiled the practiced smile of someone who's been in this moment before. I felt my throat tighten, but I refused to let it show. I picked up my water glass and set it down again, steady as a surgeon. Inside, memories unspooled, graduations where my name was left off programs, family dinners where my achievements were called cute while Callistas were legendary. When the applause died, the music swelled and guests rose to mingle. I slipped out quietly, murmuring something about needing fresh air. Instead, I went down the short hall to the ladies' room. The cool tile, the faint buzz of the ventilation fan, these were small mercies. I locked myself in a stall and let my hands press against the metal door until the tremor in them stopped. No one came looking. No one knocked. I could hear the muffled bass of the DJ starting a new song, the laughter rising again. It felt like I had been excused from existence. After a few minutes, I straightened my dress and checked my reflection in the mirror. My face looked composed. A stranger might even call it serene. I dabbed at the corner of my eye with a tissue and whispered to myself, not tonight. Not like this. Back at the table, the couple was gone. Only the older man remained, reading something on his phone. I sat down and reached into my clutch. My phone lit up. A folder labeled Plan B, Reveal glowed on the screen. I hesitated for a heartbeat, then tapped it open. Rows of photos, documents, emails, proof of my work, my foundation, my life outside this shadow, stared back at me. In the distance, Callista's laughter rang out again, bright and effortless. I watched her for a moment, then locked my phone. The plan could wait, but not forever. And just like that, I remembered the first time I was made to feel like a ghost in my own family. And just like that, I remembered the first time I was made to feel like a ghost in my own family. The memory didn't just flicker in and out, it came rushing back, whole and heavy, while I stood there in the restroom stall, holding the edge of the counter like it was the only solid thing in the room. I could see it clearly, our living room in Charlotte, the old beige carpet, the clunky VHS camcorder perched on a tripod. It was 1989, I was 7 years old, and Callista had just finished her big performance in the school play. She was Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, singing her little heart out in the spotlight. I was a munchkin, just a blur of blue and white in the background. Dad had zoomed in on her face, her curls bouncing under the stage lights, while I hopped nervously in the corner of the frame. Later, when we watched the tape back, my part wasn't there. Just Callista, curtain to curtain. What happened to me? I'd asked, my small voice wobbling. Mom hadn't even looked at me. Don't be so sensitive, she'd said. We only had so much tape left. Your sister's number was the important one. That was the first time the word sensitive stuck to me like a label I couldn't peel off. I let the restroom's quiet hum settle around me as the memories piled up. This wasn't just tonight's humiliation, it was a long line of erasures. I remembered birthdays where my cake had been combined with Callista's because it was easier to throw one party. I remembered school recitals where my name wasn't called, or was called wrong. These weren't big traumas, not the kind you can point at. They were little paper cuts, one after another, until you stopped noticing the sting. Then my mind jumped to last year, Callista's 40th. I had spent weeks putting together a scrapbook, scanning old photos, writing captions by hand. I stayed up late on weeknights after work, sifting through boxes in Mom's attic. It was my gift to show her we were still sisters under all the distance. The night of the party, she held the book up and said, "And thank you to Jane for this beautiful memory book." Our cousin Jane. Everyone clapped. I froze. My mother smiled and nodded as if it were true. I felt my mouth open but no words came. That moment sat in me like a stone ever since. Tonight, sitting in that bathroom, I could feel the same cold weight in my stomach. But something else had crept in too, a kind of clarity. I pressed a paper towel to my cheeks, but they were dry. I wasn't crying. I was cataloging every small thing that had stacked up to this. Every time I'd been rewritten out of my own efforts. Every time I'd been told, don't be so sensitive. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, at the woman standing there. I didn't look invisible. I looked insulted and awake. I tossed the paper towel, squared my shoulders, and walked back into the hallway. The music from the ballroom hit me first, some jazzy cover of a pop song. I passed a waiter carrying a tray of champagne and smiled faintly. He smiled back, a flicker of kindness in an evening built of slights. When I reached the edge of the room, I paused. Callista was laughing with the mayor's wife near the stage. Mom was by the dessert table. From here, I could see the slideshow still looping on the big screen. More photos of Callista with awards, Callista with donors, Callista shaking hands. I stayed in the shadows, watching. Not to leave, not to sulk, but to wait. The waiting didn't feel weak. It felt deliberate, like setting a chess piece down and letting the clock tick. I thought about my phone in my clutch, the folder labeled Plan B, Reveal. I had built it over years, not out of spite but out of self-defense, copies of grant applications, board minutes, press clippings. All the proof of who I really was, what I had done. I stepped further into the room, my heels soft on the carpet, and a man I didn't know brushed past me. Sorry, he said quickly. Excuse me. His accent was familiar though, northern. I scanned the crowd again. My phone buzzed in my hand. I looked down. A text message. Hey, I saw what just happened. Want to talk? I frowned. The name at the top of the message made my fingers curl instinctively around the phone. This was someone who shouldn't even be here tonight, someone who once went toe-to-toe with Callista in a very public fight over a charity bid. I raised my eyes back to the crowd, heart steady but faster now. If this person was here, it meant the party wasn't just about Callista's birthday. Something else was in motion. The name on the screen made my fingers curl around the phone instinctively. The name on the screen made my fingers curl around the phone instinctively. My thumb hovered for a second before I opened the message. Elena Grant. A name I hadn't seen pop up in months. Her text was short, no frills, you're not alone. Just letting you know that. I stared at it, my mind turning over the memory of the last time we spoke. Elena had been one of the few people in the nonprofit world who'd taken me seriously, even when I was still struggling to get my foundation off the ground. She'd been outspoken, maybe too outspoken, about how my sister operated in business. Callista doesn't share power, she'd said once, leaning across a coffee table at a diner. She repackages it. She'll smile while she's cutting your name out of your own work. At the time, I'd smiled politely, stirring my tea. She's my sister, I'd replied. She wouldn't do that to me. Elena had only shrugged. You'll see. I hadn't wanted to see. I told myself Elena was bitter because Callista's PR firm had dropped her after a messy event. I chalked it up to professional jealousy. But standing there now, in the corner of a ballroom where I'd been seated next to a restroom, I realized Elena had been right all along. The screen dimmed in my hand. I scrolled back through old messages until I found the one from 3 months ago. Elena had sent me a link to an article about intellectual property in nonprofits with a note, protect your work, Sky. Even from family. I hadn't replied. I remembered exactly where I was when I read it, my office on a rainy Tuesday, files spread across my desk, Callista's name on a grant application she hadn't written. Tonight, as I looked at her glowing under the chandeliers, every moment where my words or my ideas had been minimized replayed like a slow reel. One memory cut sharper than the rest. Last week, I'd emailed Callista a paragraph I'd written for tonight's gala, a blessing, really. A way of saying, I still love you, I still support you. I'd imagined her reading it aloud, giving me a small nod, maybe a glance across the room. On stage tonight, she had read my exact words. I recognized every sentence. But when she finished, she smiled sweetly and said, "That was written by our cousin Harper. Isn't she poetic?" The applause was thunderous. I had clapped too, my hands moving like they belonged to someone else. I caught a glimpse of my mother at the dessert table. I slipped through the crowd, careful not to bump anyone, until I reached her. "Mom," I said softly. She turned, startled. "Yes." Her smile was polite, the one she used for donors. "That paragraph Callista read, it was mine. Did you know that?" Verina's eyes flicked to the stage. She set down her fork. "Sky, let it go. This is Callista's night. Don't start." My throat went tight, but I kept my voice level. "I'm not starting anything. I'm telling you what's true." Her expression didn't change. She smoothed her dress and said, "We're proud of you, you know. In our own way. But sometimes it's better to let these things slide." Then she stepped away to greet another guest, leaving me standing there with the smell of frosting and perfume. I walked back to my little corner table. The music swelled again, and Callista's laughter floated over it like a ribbon. I sat down, placing my phone on the tablecloth. I no longer felt sad. The sadness had burned off, leaving something sharper. I thought of Elena's words, of the documents sitting on my hard drive, of the quiet hours I'd spent building my foundation while Callista built her image. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a pattern. I opened my phone. The screen's glow lit my hands. I scrolled to a private, unreleased video stored months ago. It was a recording of me speaking at a small community event, telling the story of how the foundation had begun, not the version Callista told, but the real one. The footage was clean, time-stamped, undeniable. My thumb pressed the file name until it highlighted. Slowly, deliberately, I typed a new title, Tonight. I locked the phone and looked up. The party was still moving, a glittering machine. But in that moment, something inside me shifted. The waiting wasn't just waiting anymore. It was preparation. That file had waited long enough. The decision didn't feel cinematic. It wasn't dramatic or flashy. No sudden spike in heart rate, no inspirational music swelling in my ears. It was quiet. Simple. Mechanical. I slid the drive from my clutch and felt its cool, weightless shape between my fingers. Like all the invisible things I'd carried for years had been compressed into something small, concentrated, ready to be plugged in. The lights in the ballroom had dimmed again as the crowd shifted its attention back to the stage. I moved with purpose through the side aisle, making my way toward the rear where Elena stood by the AV technician's console near the velvet curtain. When she saw me, she gave the smallest nod, one of those nods that says everything without saying a word. Her hand rested on her hip, the other casually holding a flute of sparkling water. She leaned in slightly and murmured, just loud enough for me to hear, "If you decide to show them I've got the HDMI connection." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Just a faint lift of my eyebrow and a smile that barely reached my cheekbones. She turned back toward the technician, chatting casually about lighting transitions, as if we were only discussing wedding decor or background jazz. But my hand stayed near the clutch. Not yet. Not until I saw what came next. Callista returned to the center of the stage, her presence as curated as her wardrobe. "Now," she said brightly into the mic, "I'd like to share something very close to my heart. The crowd hushed, expectant. She gestured to the giant screen behind her. "This," she said, voice softening for effect, "is a look back at my journey. The moments that made me the woman I am today. None of this would be possible without the incredible people who believed in me." A video montage began to play. Photos clicked by, staged shots of Callista shaking hands with corporate sponsors, footage from her early pop-up beauty booths, snippets of her TEDx talk from 3 years ago. Then came the branding shots, product design, color palettes, packaging prototypes. My work. Every visual on that screen had passed through my hands first. I had designed those slides, aligned those color stories, built the brand narrative from scratch. And then I heard her say it. As my typography and layout danced across the screen, she beamed and said, "These were created by my amazing visual team from LA. Couldn't have done it without them." The sting wasn't new. But it still surprised me. There was polite applause. A few guests whispered names to one another, trying to figure out who was who on the creative team. I stood still, watching it unfold, remembering the nights I'd spent hunched over my laptop, offering design help, just until she hired someone. I hadn't asked for credit back then. But I hadn't asked to be replaced either. The MC stepped back up after the video faded out. "And now," she said, "let's take a moment to recognize the people who made tonight possible." I knew what was coming, but I braced myself anyway. She began with the caterer, then the floral design team. Next came the social media manager, the event planner, Callista's longtime esthetician, her yoga instructor, even the chauffeur. Every name rolled off like it had been rehearsed and polished. When she reached the end of the list, she paused and smiled. "And most of all," she said, "we thank Callista for her vision, her strength, and her unwavering grace." There was no mention of me. No nod. No, Sky helped with the early planning. Not even a mispronounced version of my name. Nothing. I felt the room shift beneath me, not literally, but in the way your body adjusts when it realizes no one sees you standing there. The same sensation from childhood birthday parties when they ran out of favors just before getting to me. That quiet confirmation that you weren't counted. The air felt heavier. The wine in my stomach turned acidic. I moved, almost without thinking, toward the bar, skimming past clusters of guests lost in compliments and conversation. She was standing near the marble counter, sipping something red, laughing with a man in a linen jacket. I waited until she noticed me. Her smile didn't waver. "Sky," she said like a toast. "Isn't this all incredible? You really couldn't say my name once?" I asked, softly. She blinked. Then she sipped her wine. "Sweetheart," she said, that word sharpened by patronization, "your presence is enough." I looked at her for a long moment. "Do it again," I said clearly, "and I won't be silent." I turned and walked away before she could answer. I didn't need to hear the comeback. I knew it by heart anyway. Something like, "Oh, don't be dramatic," or, "You know I love you." A whole library of hollow reassurances. Back at the console, Elena didn't ask any questions. She saw my face and understood something had shifted. I held the flash drive out to the technician. "Can you run this on the screen?" I asked. He looked at Elena. She nodded. "Run it after the toast," she said. "We'll call it a surprise reel." The technician inserted the drive. A small loading icon blinked. Then he turned back to me. "Ready to override." I looked out at the glittering room, the white tablecloths, the curated lives, the surface-perfect smiles. "Let's give them something real," I said. The projector screen hovered in darkness for a beat too long, just enough to make people uncomfortable. A few guests turned their heads, whispering. Then it began, not with a flashy title card or Callista's logo, but with a quiet piano score and a black and white image of a woman standing in front of a dilapidated building. A caption faded in underneath, "Rebuild Shelter, 2017. The room stilled. Conversations died mid-sentence. Callista froze, still mid-pose at the center of the stage, her champagne glass tilted slightly upward like she'd been caught in a still photograph. Then came a slow montage, images of women sitting around folding tables in support group meetings, teenage girls hunched over books, volunteers handing out hygiene kits, all underscored by my voice. It wasn't scripted. It was from a small community talk I'd given over a year ago, recorded on someone's phone. Raw. Honest. My voice came through the speakers, clear and steady. We didn't build this to impress people. We built it because nobody else would. These women needed more than sympathy, they needed infrastructure, access, and dignity. On the bottom right of the screen, a soft watermark read, "Charity Foundation founded by Sky Murrin." A murmur passed through the guests like a slow wave. Someone at the front gasped, not theatrically, but as if they were seeing something they weren't supposed to see. Callista stepped back, her hand lowering just slightly. Her smile faltered. Mom Verena, she looked like she'd seen a ghost. I didn't shift my weight. I didn't move. I watched the screen like everyone else. Only I wasn't seeing it for the first time, I was watching the truth reclaim its place. One woman in the video looked straight into the camera. If Sky hadn't stepped in when she did, she said plainly, "I don't think I'd be here." She gave me something no one else ever had, a way back. There was no dramatic voiceover, no slick graphics, no PR polish. Just real stories, real names, and the one person who'd never been mentioned all night. Me. The lights rose slowly as the video ended. There was a moment, just a breath, where no one did anything. And then, slowly, people began clapping. Not polite, not uncertain. Not roaring applause either. Just the kind of slow, respectful sound that means someone's mind just changed. I felt my chest rise, then fall. Calm. My heels clicked softly on the ballroom floor as I stepped out from behind the side curtain. I didn't rush. I didn't glance around for approval. I walked toward the mic as if I'd always belonged there. Callista stood to the side now, one foot still on the edge of the stage. She was frozen. For the first time all night, she didn't have a line ready. When I reached the microphone, I didn't fumble or clear my throat. My voice was low, firm, grounded. I came here tonight thinking I'd stay quiet. As always. Thinking maybe that was easier for everyone. I let the silence stretch. No one interrupted. Not even the waitstaff. But I realized something. Silence is just another kind of lie. A lie that makes people comfortable while they erase you. A few people shifted in their seats. Others leaned forward. I didn't come here to shame anyone. I came here to celebrate my sister, like I've always tried to do. But I also won't let myself be edited out anymore. I reached into the small folder I'd tucked under my arm. My fingers didn't shake. I pulled out a single sealed envelope and walked it over to a man seated in the third row, Mark Bennett, a local attorney Callista had invited for optics. He blinked up at me, surprised, but took the envelope when I offered it. Inside is my formal withdrawal from the Murrin Family Trust, I said into the mic, returning to center stage. That includes all financial entitlements, shared property claims, and inheritance negotiations. People stirred again. Callista opened her mouth, then closed it. Verena turned toward me, confusion etched across her face. I'm not walking away in anger, I said clearly. I'm walking away because I finally see the cost of staying. I let my eyes sweep the room. I am not the failure. I'm just not for sale. And with that, I stepped down. The room remained quiet, heavy with what had just happened. No clapping now, just silence. Not out of disapproval, but because the usual script had been shredded. No one knew what to say. As I passed the second row, I heard someone whisper, "That took guts." Another voice added, "She should have been up there all along." I didn't stop. I walked straight past the cake table, the champagne fountain, the Callista 41 balloon arch past my mother, who had risen to her feet but still hadn't spoken. Her mouth opened slightly as I passed. "Sky," she started. But I kept walking. Verina's voice cracked when she called my name, but I kept walking. My heels sank slightly into the plush carpet of the lounge hallway as I slipped out of the ballroom. The heavy velvet curtain swung shut behind me with the weight of a theater act ending. The hum of clinking glasses, strings of polite laughter, and the faint strains of the band dulled to a muffled echo, leaving me in a quieter world that felt more real than the gilded stage I just left behind. The air was cooler back here, tinged with citrus cleaner and the nervous energy of staff trying not to meet my eyes. Their glances came quick, darting, cautious, almost reverent. Some nodded as I passed. Others suddenly found a reason to check their phones, as though scrolling could make me invisible. Across the way, Verina was still talking, cornering some poor guest near a table stacked with empty flutes. Her hands circled in the air, restless, the same gesture she always used when she was improvising. Her laugh came brittle, breaking under its own weight. Callista was nowhere in sight. Of course she wasn't. Callista knew when to retreat, when to bide her time. I pressed open the lounge door and stepped into the smaller seating area reserved for VIPs. Here, the lights dimmed to a softer amber glow. A bartender polished glasses with slow, deliberate strokes. Two people sat hunched on a couch, their phones angled toward their faces, pretending to scroll but sneaking glances at me over the rims of their screens. I ignored them, choosing a chair near the window. Beyond the glass, the city of Charlotte blurred into streaks of light, headlights smearing across asphalt, neon signs bleeding into one another. I pulled out my phone. The screen exploded with notifications stacked like a tower of cards. Twitter, no, X, was trending my name. Facebook, tagged, shared, dissected. Instagram, flooding with new followers, likes climbing by the second. A hashtag blazed near the top of the feed, "Let Sky Speak." I tapped a video, shaky but audible. My voice filled the speakers, my speech, raw and unpolished but real. Beneath it, a river of comments scrolled. Finally someone calls her out. Callista's silence speaks volumes. Sky Murrin, the real powerhouse. Another clip. The projection Lydia had arranged. Women's stories flashing across the screen, their voices amplified at last. People had already tracked down my foundation's page, linking donation forms, sharing testimonials. My email pinged, 5 times, then 10. Journalists. Bloggers. Former professors. Everyone wanted a quote, a reaction, a sound bite. An hour ago, I'd been nearly invisible in that ballroom. Now, it was as if every chandelier, every phone, every gaze had become a spotlight. The exhilaration hit first, like stepping into sunlight after years underground. My pulse raced, my chest lightened. But it was quickly followed by something sharper, caution. Because Callista never froze when threatened. She didn't stand still when she felt a corner tightening. She moved. Always. My inbox buzzed again. A new email at the top, formal header, neutral font. Subject line, unauthorized use of event equipment. Sender, Callista's PR firm. I opened it. A wall of corporate phrasing filled the screen, We have received credible reports, potential hacking of event technology, brand sabotage allegations. The email closed with a demand for a formal apology to mitigate reputational damage. Classic Callista. Pretending public neutrality while launching private strikes. I could practically hear her dictating the email herself, voice smooth and deliberate, a smile sharpened like glass just beneath the civility. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with that familiar disgust I'd carried since childhood. Another ping. A text this time. From Elena. Ignore the noise. I've already emailed 2 journalists. One's doing a piece called, "The Sister Behind the Screens." You'll like it. I smiled, small but genuine, for the first time that night. Loyalty from an unexpected corner. For so long, I'd believed I was standing entirely alone, shouting into silence. But people had been watching. Waiting. Quietly, carefully, hoping I'd stop swallowing my own name. I stared at Callista's email again. The words blurred, then sharpened. Should I respond? Should I ignore it and let her machine spin itself dry? My thumb hovered over the keyboard. This was the crossroads. The old Sky, the Sky they'd trained, would have folded. She would have typed out a careful, polite, apologetic response. A misunderstanding explanation. She would have retreated back into the shadows and let them rewrite the narrative. But I wasn't that Sky anymore. I'd said it into the mic, I'm not for sale. And that included my silence. I opened my notes app and began drafting my response. The words came calm, measured, without hesitation. You may have erased my name from your narrative. But I've never needed yours to build mine. I read it twice. Not to soften it, not to cut its edge, but to feel its weight. Then, without ceremony, I copied it, pasted it into my social channels, and clicked post. The screen blinked. My words went live. No music swelled, no spotlight fell. The lounge didn't erupt. But something shifted, inside me, outside me. A hush, not one the room could hear but one that lived in my chest, deep and steady. I set the phone on the table. My pulse slowed. 3 minutes later, a new notification lit the screen. Callista Murrin has issued a public statement. And just like that, the next act began. The screen of my phone lit up again, and there it was, the alert I knew was coming. Callista Murrin has issued a public statement. I was still seated in the back lounge, the low hum of ambient jazz playing from the speakers, but the air in the room shifted immediately. As if the digital battlefield had just been reignited and everyone could feel the temperature rising. I opened the post with one thumb, already guessing the tone before the first sentence even finished loading. I love my sister deeply, it began, the kind of opening meant to sound warm but hollow enough to echo. She had every right to share her story, though I wish she'd done it privately. Let's respect boundaries and focus on healing. I read it 3 times. Not because I couldn't comprehend it, but because it was so calculated, so masterfully disingenuous, that it deserved a slow read just to appreciate the audacity. The comments below were split, just like I expected. Some praised her restraint. Classy response. Taking the high road. But others saw through it. This is manipulation 101. Still no apology. Where's her name on your brand site, Callista? I locked my phone and stared out the window for a few seconds. The city lights outside blurred, glowing and unbothered. I thought about how long I'd lived in someone else's reflection, and how many years I'd let comments like that statement go unchecked. But not anymore. I didn't have time to reflect for long. Another buzz, this time from the family group chat, silent for months, and now lit up like a flare. Verena, ever the peacemaker in public and the pacifier in private, had revived the thread with. Girls, please don't make this uglier. Sky, you made your point. Let's end this quietly. No mention of truth. No ownership. Just a subtle push back into silence. Callista followed it up moments later with a thumbs up emoji. Thumbs up. That's what my boundary, my courage, my declaration was worth to her, a cartoon hand, sent in 2 seconds flat. I didn't respond. Not yet. The truth is, silence has an edge. And sometimes, it's the sharpest thing in the room. I tucked my phone into my blazer pocket and leaned back. Across from me sat a woman I didn't recognize, one of Callista's former college friends, maybe. She gave me a faint smile, one of those hesitant acknowledgments where the other person is clearly debating whether to offer support or stay out of it. Before I could say anything, another message came in, this time, a private DM from my cousin Lydia, who hadn't spoken to me in nearly 2 years. She'd always played neutral. Always said things like, I stay out of family drama, which, in our household, was code for siding with whoever had more power. Her message was short, but not meaningless. We always knew something was off. Thank you for finally saying it. I read it twice. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a call to arms. But it was something. I replied with a simple, thanks. There wasn't much else to say. Vindication doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it just shows up in a text from someone who once stood back and finally steps an inch closer. But the calm didn't last long. My phone vibrated again, and this time, it was from Leah, my assistant. She forwarded me a blog post from a lifestyle site I recognized immediately. It was small, but deeply embedded in Callista's network. She didn't own it, but she'd featured on it at least 5 times in the last year. The headline hit first, Jealousy or Justice? The troubled history of Sky Murren. I opened it, jaw set. The piece was written like a character assassination dressed in polite concern. It described me as estranged, difficult to work with, emotionally reactive, and claimed I'd been acting out for years in the shadow of a successful sibling. It cited unnamed sources close to the family, and even used an outdated photo of me from a hospital fundraising gala where I looked completely drained. Underneath, Leah had written, "You want me to draft a rebuttal?" I stared at the screen. My instinct was to fight it line by line. Call out the inaccuracies. Defend myself. But then I remembered something I'd written in a notebook months ago, when I'd first started building the backup plan I used tonight, control the story by refusing to play their game. I replied, no. I have something better. I didn't waste another second. I stood from the lounge chair and made my way to a quiet alcove off the hallway, far enough from the noise of the bar but still within the venue. There, I opened my phone's cloud drive. I scrolled through the folders until I found one labeled Grant Approvals, Verified. Inside was a scanned letter from the mayor's office, signed and dated, approving my nonprofit's initial funding 2 years ago. It was a document that legally named me as founder, director, and executive authority. No room for spin. No room for question. I composed an email, addressed it to 3 journalists, 2 from major publications, 1 from a trusted community newsletter. The subject line, for transparency, the real story. The body of the email was short, direct, and attached the official letter, press coverage, and video timestamps. I hit send. Then, I dialed a number I hadn't used in months, an editor from the Charlotte Tribune who had once asked me, off the record, when are you going to stop protecting your sister's image and start telling the truth? She answered on the second ring. It's Sky, I said. You still want the exclusive? There was a pause, then a breath of surprise. You're ready. I'm done protecting her. The article dropped within the hour. Its title: The Sister Who Wasn't Invited, Until the World Noticed. By the time I scrolled to the second paragraph, my inbox was already filling with notifications, and my phone felt warm in my palm. I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator louder than the street outside. I had come straight home from the event. No champagne, no afterparty. Just me, the glow of the screen, and the truth finally making its way into daylight. The piece was relentless but measured. It didn't read like gossip. It read like history. It listed the nonprofits I'd built, the shelters funded, the workforce programs for single mothers, all with my name attached. It contrasted them against years of being kept out of photos, out of press releases, and, in some cases, out of family gatherings entirely. Screenshots of the gala were embedded between paragraphs, my sister smiling on stage, me seated near the restroom, and then that moment, the screen lighting up with Charity Foundation founded by Sky Murren. Callista's PR team, the article noted, had declined to comment. By the time I finished reading, the hashtag Sky Murren was trending. Not just locally, but nationally. The comments below the article were raw and unfiltered. This isn't sister drama. It's emotional erasure. She built something real while Callista built a following. I never liked Callista's brand anyway, this confirms it. Sponsors began quietly announcing reevaluations of their partnerships with Callista. The kind of polite distancing that only happens when big money is at stake. The reversal was happening in real time, and it was brutal in its swiftness. I put the phone down on the counter and took a long breath. My tea had gone cold. I drank it anyway. Then came the voice message. Not a text. Not an email. A voice message from my mother. The last time she'd called, it was to remind me not to embarrass the family at a fundraiser. I didn't know how badly we failed you, her voice trembled. I don't even know what to say anymore. I listened once. Then again. The second time, I caught the sound of her swallowing hard, maybe even crying. But she didn't say the words I had waited decades to hear, no apology for specific things, no acknowledgement of complicity. Just confusion. Just regret wrapped in vagueness. I didn't reply. I saved the message instead. Meanwhile, Callista cracked. Not in public at first. She disappeared from Instagram stories for 12 hours, a lifetime in influencer time. Then, at dawn, she posted a video. No makeup, just a gray sweatshirt and a shaky tone. Half apology, half justification. I never meant to erase Sky, she said. I just thought I had to be the strong one. She bit her lip. Looked off camera. Then back. Please, don't cancel me. This is still my livelihood. But the damage had already taken its course. Comments flooded in, skeptical at best, angry at worst. Her follower count dipped by tens of thousands, sponsors dropped quietly, and people began reposting side-by-side comparisons of my foundation's work and her philanthropy press shots. The difference was glaring. I didn't gloat. I didn't post memes or retweets. I did what I had promised myself I would do, nothing more than the truth. At noon that day, I walked to the construction site of our newest women's shelter, a low-slung brick building on the edge of downtown Charlotte. Hard hats, steel beams, the smell of sawdust in the air. This was my life. This was the work. A photographer from the Tribune met me there, asking for just one shot. I obliged, walking slowly toward the unfinished doorway, my heels crunching on gravel. I posted the photo myself an hour later with one caption. Visibility is power, but dignity is louder. That was it. No hashtags. No tagging. No mention of my sister. Within minutes, it had tens of thousands of likes. People understood. People saw the difference between speaking out and showing up. Weeks passed. Callista's public presence shrank. The family group chat went quiet again. Even Verena stopped sending vague messages. The noise died down, but the undercurrent of tension remained. My nights were quieter but heavier. Vindication didn't feel like I thought it would. It wasn't fireworks. It was a steady exhale after holding your breath for years. Then one afternoon, an envelope arrived. No return address. My assistant had left it on my desk with the day's mail. I opened it slowly, expecting a legal notice, another PR attempt, or maybe a plea. Inside was a single family photo. The four of us, my father, my mother, Callista, and me, standing in front of the old house. I was maybe 8 years old. In the original photo, I'd been cropped out when it appeared in Callista's first memoir. But here, I was in frame. On the back, in my father's handwriting. "Sorry we kept you out of frame." I sat with it for a long time. It didn't erase anything. It didn't rewrite the years. But it was the first thing that had ever resembled an apology. I didn't cry when I read the letter. But I folded it, kept it in my drawer, and got back to work. I didn't cry when I read the letter. But I folded it, kept it in my drawer, and got back to work. The house was silent except for the low hum of the air conditioner. Outside, late autumn sunlight spread across my yard, catching the tips of the oak leaves like copper. It had been weeks since the gala, but the dust still hadn't fully settled. Not online. Not in my family. Not in me. I stopped answering the calls and texts after the third day. Not out of spite, just necessity. People I hadn't heard from in years wanted to check in. Donors wanted to meet. Former classmates sent long, rambling DMs about how they'd always known I was the real heart of the family. My phone had become a confessional booth. I left it on silent and let it buzz into the night. The letter from my father stayed where I'd put it, top drawer, left-hand side of my desk. Not forgiven. Not forgotten. It wasn't heavy anymore, but it was still there, like an old scar under a sleeve. Some mornings I opened the drawer just to make sure it hadn't vanished. It never did. In those quiet days, I learned something about healing. It wasn't grand or cinematic. It was quiet mornings making coffee. It was answering emails one by one. It was building things without waiting for permission. Vindication wasn't the victory, peace was. 3 weeks later, I stood at the entrance of the new wing of our women's shelter, the one we'd been planning before the gala changed everything. Donors from across the country had reached out after reading the article. Some wrote checks. Others sent boxes of supplies. We'd raised enough to fund 2 additional programs, including a legal aid clinic for mothers facing eviction. The sky that day was cold but clear. The ribbon stretched across the doorway, crisp and red. I held the scissors steady as cameras clicked, but I didn't make a speech. I didn't need to. The applause, soft at first and then louder, said everything I wanted said. Women who had once come to our shelter stood in the crowd, holding their children, clapping slowly, smiling at me like I was one of them, which, in a way, I still was. Later that evening, back in my office, I read an email forwarded by my assistant. It was a short blog post about Callista. She'd moved her accounts to private. She'd lost 2 major endorsements. She was now teaching branding resilience workshops in small conference rooms. She hadn't tagged me in months. I didn't follow her anymore. There was no glee in reading it, no surge of satisfaction. Only a quiet sense that the world had rebalanced itself, at least a little. A week after the ribbon cutting, an envelope slid under my door. This one wasn't from my father. It was an invitation. Thanksgiving dinner. No handwritten note inside, just "please come home" in neat script. No location, no time, just the plea. I didn't rip it up. I didn't RSVP either. I pinned it to my fridge with a magnet shaped like a lighthouse. Not as a promise, but as evidence, they had reached out. Whether it was hope or guilt, I didn't know yet. But it was something. One evening, as dusk slid into night, I sat at my desk and opened the drawer again. The letter from my father was still there. I read it once more, this time not searching for anything between the lines. It was what it was, a late, incomplete attempt at repair. I folded it neatly and moved it from the drawer to a small wooden box labeled, "Started Here." It felt right. That box held the first business cards from the foundation, the prototype pamphlets from our shelter programs, and now, this letter. Proof of beginnings, even messy ones. I leaned back in my chair and looked around my home office. It no longer felt like a hiding place. The walls were lined with framed photos of shelter graduations, donor check presentations, and quiet snapshots of women walking into their first job interviews. Sunlight poured through the blinds, catching on a framed quote above my desk. "Don't wait to be chosen. Choose yourself." That was my father's handwriting, too. He'd written it on a scrap of paper once, back before everything fractured. I'd found it tucked in an old book and had it framed. It meant something different now. Not advice. Not permission. Just truth. I glanced at the pinned Thanksgiving invitation on the fridge, then back at the keepsake box. My life wasn't tied to their approval anymore. It wasn't tied to erasing them either. It was simply mine. I stood, stretched, and walked to the window. Outside, streetlights flickered on, and somewhere down the block a child laughed. Life moved forward. My phone buzzed on the desk, another message from a donor, another request for a talk. I let it buzz. For once, I didn't feel rushed. Vindication had been public. Healing was private. And it was happening now, in small, unremarkable ways, like making tea, like opening drawers, like cutting ribbons without speeches. I turned back to my desk, opened a new file on my laptop, and began drafting plans for a mobile shelter unit. My fingers moved steadily, not with urgency but with clarity. I wasn't building this for recognition anymore. I was building because it mattered. The letter was no longer in the drawer. But its lesson stayed with me: never wait to be invited to your own life. Sometimes, the loudest victories are the quietest ones. Sky didn't seek revenge through anger, she chose dignity over drama, truth over noise. And in doing so, she reminded us that being overlooked doesn't mean being powerless. Have you ever been erased by the people closest to you? What did you do to reclaim your voice? If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life stories of strength, redemption,